Welcome everyone to Fruits of the Orchard. Tonight we're going to be studying about Parshat Shelach, and we're going to start with the sense, according to the Sefer Yetzirah, of the month of Tamuz and the sense of the month of Av. For those who want to follow, we're on page 394 of Fruits of the Orchard. It's called Hearing and Seeing. According to the Sefer Yetzirah, the month of Tammuz, the sense, the chush, is the sense of seeing, of sight. And the following month of Av is the sense of hearing. Now, what's the connection to these months? So in Parshat Shelach, we have the whole story of Moshe sending 12 spies to spy out the land of Israel in preparation for Israel entering the land and conquering the land. And they were gone for 40 days. And when they came back, so they gave, in the beginning, it sounded like a positive report. They brought fruit from Israel, which were like huge. And they said, the land is incredible and fruitful and productive. And here are the fruits to prove it. But the people are too strong. The cities are too fortified. We will not be able to defeat them. And the people listened, and they stood and they cried at their tents. And they said, let's pick a new leader. Let's go back to Egypt. What are we going to do? We can't go into the land. And what, we're going to live in the desert forever? We'll go back to Egypt. So this, in God's eyes, was a huge sin, a huge lack of faith. And the result was that they had to wander for 40 years in the desert, a year for a day, a year for a day. And until that generation, the men, according to tradition, the women did not lose their faith and did not listen to the spies. But that whole generation of the men between 20 and 60 died off in the desert until a new generation was ready to come into the land. So what's the connection with the months of Tamuz and Av? So according to tradition, they began their journey on Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. And they came back on the 9th of Av, which we now refer to as Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. So in other words, the 40 days that they were spying out Israel, all 30 days of the month of Tammuz, and the 9 days, actually it turned out to be 40 because Tammuz is two Rosh Chodeshes. So it's 40 days altogether. But the idea is during the month of Tammuz, they were looking at the land, they were seeing the land, but obviously it was superficial. And when they came back and they gave the evil report, well, if no one would have listened to them, then we would have just gone into the land. We were ready to go in. But the problem is that they listened to the evil report, to the Lashon Hara. So the first thing we can learn from this, and that's why the Sefer Yetzirah says the sense of seeing and the sense of hearing. We see things all the time, but are we seeing them with a deeper perspective, a deeper eye? Or are we just seeing the world very, very one-dimensionally and very superficially? And the same thing with hearing. When we hear things, do we just accept everything, or is there some kind of discernment in our hearing? So other than people who are challenged with sight and hearing, we all see and hear, but what are we seeing and what are we hearing? So this combination of seeing and hearing, so this very much has to do with the Shema, because we know that the first word of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, is hear, Israel, God our God, God is one. And all of the commentaries for all the generations point out that it's not just a matter of hearing. What's really meant is understanding. Israel, understand that God our God, God is one. Not just hearing it, but understanding it. And so hearing in Kabbalah is always connected to Bina. It's called the mother image. And seeing is always connected to Chachma, which is the father image. And in Kabbalah, we have a saying that says that Chachma and Bina are like two beloveds who never separate. Chachma and Bina always go together, like soulmates. They're a pair. Abba and Ima. They go together. So here we see a beautiful thing, that what we're trying to learn here is that the fixing for the spies is to see deeper than the surface, to hear deeper than the surface. And so one of the cardinal verses and applications of this is the Shema, is that we're told to hear, but it means to understand. So we have a couple of amazing things here, because if you look at the Shema, the word Shema, Shin Mem Ayin, we know that the Ayin is a large letter, and the Daled of Echad, that God is one, is a large letter. But here we see an amazing thing, that Shema means to hear, but you have a big letter Ayin. What does Ayin mean? The eye is seeing. So really what's being hinted to here, it's not just, again, physical hearing. Here it's hinting that the hearing and the seeing have to go together. And the ayin is big to tell us that it can't be superficial sight. If we want to understand God's oneness, if we want to understand Eretz Yisrael, the spies, they saw the beauty of the land. They saw the productiveness of the land. But they were scared by what they felt was an enemy that could not be defeated. They couldn't see beyond their own fears and trust in God's promise that he would bring us into the land of milk and honey. So there's another hint to hearing and seeing going together. And that is when you take the letters of Shema, Shin, Mem, Ayin, there's a verse that represents these three letters, and it's Se'u Marom Einechem. Lift up your eyes to above. So here, again, we see very beautifully that the letters of Shema are the first letters of three words that mean lift up your eyes to what's above. So here again, we see the connection between hearing and seeing. So let's go back to how the sages understand the word Shema in a more simple level. When it says Shema Yisrael, hear Israel. So the sages may make two comments about this, and this is the Jewish law that comes from this. The first one is, hear Israel, meaning hear in any language that you understand. So therefore, the mitzvah of saying Shema every day, it is a mitzvah from the Torah. One could say it in English or any other language and have fulfilled their requirement of saying the Shema. And they learn it from the word Shema. They're allowed to hear the proclamation that God is one in any language that you understand. Remember, the word Shema here means not just hear, it also means to understand. So that's one thing that they learned. And the other thing they learn is, let your ears hear what your lips say. What does that mean? It means that we have to recite the Shema. We can scream it if we want. We could say it in a regular voice, or we could whisper it. But the sages are saying you can't fulfill the mitzvah of Shema silently. Your ears have to hear what your lips are saying. And this actually is the same idea about the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei, the cardinal prayer of Judaism, is also that we're supposed to enunciate the words just enough that our own ears can hear it. Other people aren't really supposed to hear it because everyone is trying to concentrate on their own. But also the same idea that the Amidah is not supposed to be a silent prayer, even though some people actually refer to it as a silent prayer. But according to Jewish law, your lips have to be enunciating the words. And it could be the softest enunciation that it should come into the world and not just be a silent prayer. So here we're reminded of what happened at Mount Sinai, where we could see the sounds of the shofar, what's called synesthesia, and we could hear that which is usually only seen. That was this mystical, spiritual experience of Sinai, is where the senses crossed and we could see the sounds. That's what the verse says. We saw the sounds of the shofar. So this is connected actually to the Shema as well. The idea that every time we say Shema is a potent, powerful opportunity to be in contact with the oneness of God. Now, many people are challenged with this because if someone is praying with a minyan and is trying to keep up with the pace of the prayers, so maybe on the clock, a person has around 5 seconds to say the verse, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. It could be with incredible kavana, deep intent, but we always, if we want to keep up with the davening, so we usually don't have a lot of time. That doesn't mean it can't be powerful. But for those who have my book on the Shema, 200 Meditations on Judaism's Cardinal Statement of Faith, I encourage everyone to not only say the Shema at the appointed times, but in a sense, the Shema should be one of the main focuses of meditation for us to connect to the oneness of God. And then a person could take a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes and focus on each word of the Shema and to really delve deeply into it. And here it could be silent, because here we're not fulfilling a mitzvah per se of saying the Shema. So here again, we have a connection between silence and speech. And this, of course, is the very Kabbalistic word, chashmal. Chashmal is this energy that Ezekiel sees in what's called the vision of the chariot. This incredible vision that he has of the angels and ultimately of God. And he sees an energy that he calls chashmal. And the word chashmal is divided by the syllable. Chash means silent, mal means speaking. So here you have in one word the paradox of the sounds of silence. We mentioned Paul Simon in the previous recording, the sounds of silence. This is chashmal. So we see that also, even when we pray the Amidah, on a certain level, it is a silent prayer. On another level, we're supposed to enunciate the words enough that we can hear what we're saying. So this is a great paradox, but we see this paradox also going back to hearing and seeing, because we know the action that we take when we're about to say the Shema. We close our eyes, and then we cover our eyes with a second covering with our hand. And so here, we've been saying that in the word Shema is hinted in a number of different ways, also seeing. But here, we're told you have to close your eyes and cover your eyes in order to see deeper. And this is something I learned from Reb Shlomo. He used to say all the time, is that sometimes when you really want to see something, you have to close your eyes. And that's why many people in prayer close their eyes. In meditation, close their eyes. Sometimes we could be standing at the top of a mountain or at the ocean side. And at a certain point, we're so inspired, we just naturally close our eyes to take it all in. We're seeing it, but to get it deeper, we close our eyes in order to bring it in. And this is like women when they light the Shabbos candles, how they bring the light in and then they close their eyes in order to see the infinite light that they're bringing into the Shabbat. So this is all alluded to, going back to the 40 days in Parshat Shelach of the spies spying out the land, crosses and joins 2 months, Tamuz and Av. And as we said, the sense of Tammuz is seeing, and the sense of Av is hearing. And we need to rectify both of those in order to fix the mistake of the spies. So now that we're talking about the Shema, and especially the actual word Shema, I'm just going to add a few beautiful hints here about the word Shema. So one is that the word Shema equals 410. And 410 equals the word Kadosh, holy, Kadosh. So again, it's hinting to the idea that when we say the Shema, we have a real opportunity to connect to true holiness, the holiness of God. Because ultimately, like the Slonim Rebbe says, there's two levels of holiness. One level, we work at becoming holy through study, through prayer, through good deeds, through meditation, through contemplation, through what's called cheshbon and nefesh, soul accounting. And we try to get pure and more holy. And hopefully we can achieve that. But the Slonim Rebbe says that there's a second level. It's totally a gift from God. It's a gift from God. Many times it's connected to our what's called hishtadlut, the efforts that we're making, but there are no guarantees. There are no guarantees. And that ultimately, holiness is a gift from God. And that's the word Shema. Shema is an opportunity to connect to the oneness of God and the holiness of God. Another word that has the same gematria of 410 is Mishkan, the tabernacle that we built in the desert. So if you remember, when God first commands Moshe to build a tabernacle, so the verse is, Asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Make for me a holy place. And here, the Mishkan comes from the root Shekhinah. That's the root of Mishkan, Shochen. That this is a place for the divine presence, the Shekhinah to dwell. Usually we refer to the temples in Jerusalem as the Mikdash, as the place of holiness. But in the Torah, even though it's talking about the Mishkan, it says Asuli Mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. So already it's being alluded to that the Mishkan is, we'll call it a temporary holy place, and that eventually all the elements of the Mishkan should be included in the building of a temple. But what's always pointed out, it says, make for me a holy place, and I will dwell in their midst. So the very, very well-quoted statement here is, it doesn't say, and I will dwell in its midst, meaning in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, but I will dwell in their midst, meaning in each and every person. So here, the connection of Shema equaling Mishkan is that when we say the Shema, we can imagine that we are creating, through our saying this, through our fulfilling the mitzvah, we're creating a dwelling place for God to enter into us. So that's just a very, very beautiful and powerful thought of, call it a kavana, of what we can accomplish by saying the Shema. And then there's one other connection with 410, and that is there's two words that are usually put together, and they both have the gematria of 410. And this is talking about, it's usually applied to the waves of the sea, to the tides, but it also applies to our emotional state. So the word for, we'll call it high tide, is called geut, but it also means like pride. And then the other, and that equals 410. Gimel, Aleph, Vav, Tav, geut. And low tide is called shafel. which means low tide, but also applies to us emotionally and psychologically, that we have our highs and we have our lows. We have a overblown ego, a ga'ava, geut, but we also have a proper expression of the ego in shiflut, in existential lowliness. So both of those words, shafel, also equals 410. So what we can learn from this is when we say that God is one, so that means in the good times and in not such good times, when we understand God's ways in the world and when we don't understand, when we're confronted with good and we want to thank God, and sometimes we're confronted with tremendous tests and trials, but ultimately to believe in the oneness of God, whether it's geut or shafel. If we're on a high or if we're on a low, always hang on to the oneness of God, and it will, in a way, equal out. So we'll end with a bracha. We'll end with a bracha that we read Parshat Shelach. Here in Israel, it will be this coming week. Outside of Israel, it will be in 2 weeks. But right after that is Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. Begins exactly the time period we're talking about in the Parsha. So we should all be blessed, especially when it comes to seeing the reality of the land of Israel, that we should see beyond the superficial, and the entire Jewish people should celebrate and acknowledge and praise and be grateful that we're able to return after 2,000 years to our homeland.